What if I told you that the most gentle souls among us possess a hidden power that terrifies manipulators more than anything else? Today, we're diving deep into a psychological phenomenon that changes everything we think we know about strength, vulnerability, and the dynamics between empaths and those who try to exploit them. Picture this: someone who has spent years absorbing everyone else's pain, managing other people's emotions, and sacrificing their own needs for the sake of others. They've been told they're too sensitive, too emotional, too much. But what happens when this same person finally reaches their breaking point? What happens when they say enough is enough? The answer will shock you, because it's not what you'd expect. They don't become cold or cruel. They don't turn into the very thing that hurt them. Instead, they undergo a transformation so profound that it threatens the entire foundation of manipulative relationships everywhere. This transformation was first documented by Carl Jung, the pioneering psychologist who spent decades studying the human psyche. Jung discovered something remarkable about empaths that modern psychology is only just beginning to understand. When an empath finally awakens to their true power, they don't just heal from their wounds. They become completely immune to the tactics that once controlled them. But here's what makes this truly dangerous to manipulators. The awakened empath doesn't fight back using the same weapons. They transcend the entire battlefield. They operate from a completely different level of consciousness, one that renders manipulation ineffective and exposes it for what it really is. Jung called this process the integration of opposites. The empath learns to hold both compassion and discernment, both openness and boundaries, both love and self-protection simultaneously. They become what I call the sovereign healer, someone who heals from a position of strength rather than sacrifice. Let me break down exactly how this transformation unfolds, because understanding these stages could change your life forever. Stage 1 is recognition. This is when the fog lifts and patterns become crystal clear. The empath suddenly sees how they've been absorbing blame that wasn't theirs, apologizing for others' bad behavior, and believing that love meant endless giving while receiving crumbs in return. Jung called this the lifting of the veil, when unconscious patterns become conscious. Sarah experienced this at work with a colleague who was masterful at taking credit while deflecting blame. For years, she absorbed his projections and questioned her own perceptions. But when recognition hit, she saw the pattern clearly for the first time. She stopped explaining herself, stopped defending her work to someone whose opinion was irrelevant. The shift was immediate. Stage 2 is integration. This is where things get really interesting. The empath doesn't reject their sensitivity. They weaponize it. They use their hyper-perceptive abilities not to absorb and please, but to see through manipulation before it even begins. They become psychological detectives, reading people's unconscious motivations with surgical precision. Modern neuroscience confirms what Jung intuited decades ago. Empaths' brains are wired differently, with hyperactive mirror neurons and heightened activity in emotional processing areas. But this same wiring that makes empaths vulnerable also makes them incredibly powerful when they learn to direct it consciously. Michael's mother had controlled him for years through guilt, shame, and emotional blackmail. She would threaten dramatic consequences when he set boundaries and make every conversation about her pain. But when Michael integrated these insights, he stopped participating in the drama. He felt compassion for his mother's pain without taking responsibility for it. Her manipulations became desperate, then eventually stopped altogether. Stage 3 is sovereignty. This is the most dangerous stage for manipulators because the empath stops seeking external validation and becomes what Jung called individuated, psychologically whole and self-directed. They no longer need others to complete them because they've completed themselves through conscious inner work. Lisa had been in a relationship where she constantly walked on eggshells, managing her partner's moods and accepting responsibility for their happiness. When she discovered Jung's work on psychological projection, she realized her partner was using her as a dumping ground for their own self-hatred. Every criticism they leveled at her was actually something they couldn't accept about themselves. When Lisa stopped defending and explaining, the relationship ended quickly. Without her unconscious participation, there was nothing left. But here's what makes this transformation truly revolutionary. The awakened empath doesn't just escape the narcissistic dynamic. They transform it into wisdom that makes them immune to future manipulation. They develop what I call conscious empathy, the ability to feel deeply without being overwhelmed, to love fully without losing themselves. This creates what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to transform opposite forces into something entirely new. The empath's former weakness becomes their strength, but their compassion doesn't become weakness. Instead, both qualities mature into conscious wisdom. The most shocking part? This transformation often triggers what Jung called a shadow projection crisis in the manipulator. Without the empath to carry their disowned feelings, the narcissist is forced to face their own emotional reality. This is unbearable for someone who has spent their life avoiding their inner world. The narcissist may escalate their manipulation attempts or frantically seek new sources of empathic supply. But the awakened empath remains unmoved. They've developed psychological immunity, the ability to witness others' emotional storms without being pulled into them. This immunity isn't coldness, it's clarity. They can feel compassion for the narcissist's pain while refusing to enable their harmful behavior. They can love the person while rejecting the dysfunction. This nuanced response is something manipulators cannot understand or counter. Jung identified 3 levels of empathic development, and understanding where you are determines your vulnerability to manipulation. Level 1 is the unconscious empath. You feel everything but understand nothing. You absorb others' emotions without realizing it, believing that love means endless giving and that boundaries are selfish. At this level, your empathy controls you rather than you controlling it. You're like an emotional sponge that soaks up whatever it encounters. Level 2 is the awakening empath. You recognize your empathic abilities and begin understanding how they've been used against you. You start seeing patterns in your relationships and take responsibility for your part in them. You're beginning to develop conscious empathy, the ability to choose when and how to engage your empathic abilities. Level 3 is the sovereign empath. You've integrated Jung's teachings about shadow work and individuation. You can feel deeply without being overwhelmed, love fully without losing yourself. You've developed psychological sovereignty, the ability to remain centered in your own truth while remaining open to others. Your empathy becomes a tool for wisdom rather than a weapon used against you. The journey from level 1 to level 3 requires what Jung called the courage to become conscious. You must be willing to see how you've participated in your own victimization, not to blame yourself, but to reclaim your power to choose differently. But Jung issued a crucial warning about empathic awakening. With great psychological power comes great responsibility. The awakened empath possesses abilities that can be used for healing or harm. Their capacity to see through others' masks, detect deception, and understand hidden motivations must be used consciously and ethically. Jung emphasized that the goal isn't to become invulnerable, but to become authentic. The awakened empath must guard against becoming what they once suffered under, someone who uses psychological insight to manipulate rather than heal. The highest expression of empathic awakening is what Jung called conscious compassion, the ability to love without enabling, to help without rescuing, to see clearly without judging harshly. This is the difference between empathic wisdom and empathic revenge. Some empaths, when they first awaken to their power, want to use it to expose and shame those who hurt them. But Jung understood that this keeps you trapped in the very dynamic you're trying to escape. True empathic sovereignty means rising above the need for revenge and using your gifts to create healthy relationships rather than destroy unhealthy ones. The fed-up empath's ultimate power isn't in what they can do to others, but in what they can create for themselves: a life of authentic relationships, conscious choices, and genuine peace. Jung observed that the greatest danger to unconscious systems isn't conscious opposition, but conscious withdrawal. When empaths stop participating in dysfunctional dynamics, those dynamics can no longer sustain themselves. Your sensitivity was never your weakness. It was your early warning system, alerting you to toxic people and environments. Your deep feeling was never too much. It was the full spectrum of human experience that others had learned to numb. Your desire for authentic connection was never naive. It was your soul calling you toward relationships worthy of your depth. The narcissist feared your awakening because they knew that once you saw clearly, you could never be fooled again. Once you valued yourself properly, you could never be undervalued. Once you understood your worth, you could never be convinced to settle for less. Jung's vision was of humans who had integrated all aspects of themselves: light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, love and boundaries. The awakened empath embodies this integration. They become dangerous not through aggression, but through absolute authenticity. This authenticity is revolutionary because it refuses to participate in the unconscious agreements that keep dysfunctional systems functioning. It declares, "I will no longer absorb what isn't mine. I will no longer manage what I didn't create. I will no longer sacrifice my truth for others' comfort." Your journey from unconscious victim to conscious sovereign isn't just personal transformation, it's contribution to collective healing. Every empath who awakens makes it easier for the next one to do the same. Jung wrote in his final works, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." For empaths, this means embracing both their sensitivity and their strength, their compassion and their discernment, their capacity to love and their right to be loved authentically in return. The empath who finally says enough doesn't lose their ability to feel deeply. They gain the ability to feel wisely. They don't close their heart. They learn to open it selectively to those who have earned access through their own consciousness and authenticity. Remember Jung's discovery about fed-up empaths being more dangerous than narcissists ever imagined. The danger was never in becoming cruel or vengeful. The danger was in becoming conscious, sovereign, and immune to manipulation. The awakened empath represents what happens when consciousness refuses to participate in unconscious destruction. This is why they often face resistance not just from narcissists, but from entire systems that depend on their unconscious participation. But this resistance is necessary for collective growth. Jung called it the tension of opposites, the conflict between conscious and unconscious forces that ultimately leads to psychological evolution. The awakened empath represents the conscious force that challenges unconscious patterns. They become what I call unconsciousness disruptors, people whose mere presence challenges others to examine their own psychological patterns. The narcissist fears them because they can no longer be used, but the entire system of unconscious manipulation fears them because they model a different way of being that makes unconscious patterns visible and unacceptable. The ultimate danger of the awakened empath lies not in what they do, but in what they refuse to do anymore. They refuse to absorb what isn't theirs, manage others' emotions, sacrifice their well-being for others' comfort, explain themselves to those who don't want to understand, or participate in drama that doesn't serve growth. This refusal is more powerful than any attack because it's based on Jung's principle of psychological nonviolence. The awakened empath doesn't need to fight the narcissist. They simply withdraw their participation from the dynamic. Without the empath's unconscious cooperation, the entire manipulative system collapses. Your sensitivity was never your weakness. It was strength in disguise, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The empath's gentleness was never weakness. It was power under conscious control, directed by wisdom rather than driven by unconscious patterns. You're not too much. You're not too sensitive. You're not too deep. You're exactly what this unconscious world needs to wake up. Your awakening doesn't just transform your own life. It contributes to the healing of human relationship patterns that have been dysfunctional for generations. The awakened empath is part of Jung's vision for humanity's psychological evolution. They're not just healing themselves. They're modeling what conscious relationship looks like, showing that it's possible to love deeply while maintaining boundaries, to feel everything while staying centered, to give generously while never depleting themselves. This is the true danger of the fed-up empath. They prove that another way of being is possible. They demonstrate that consciousness can triumph over manipulation, that authenticity can overcome deception, that love combined with wisdom is the most powerful force in the human experience.